I'm going to turn it over to Ed to talk about what, what does, what are you trying to do at HHO? What is the Midwest Harm Reduction Institute all about, and reacting kind of to what? Oh, Bay, you can stay.
Oh, I think this one works. This one works. Yeah, this is.
Oh, you're
fine.
okay. Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Because I want to be. Oh, okay.
Sure. So I'll just really briefly tell you a little bit about the organization I work for and the Midwest Harm Reduction Institute and how we came about, how the Midwest Harm Reduction Institute came about. So Heartland Health Outreach is Chicago's version of the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. We're the healthcare for the homeless entity for Chicago and the metropolitan area. And I would just want to say that at Heartland Alliance, we really look at our work as human rights work. So whether we're doing housing, whether we're doing healthcare, whether we're doing employment services, things like this, we're doing it because it is a right to have these things. And that those services need to be delivered in a way, in a manner that's consistent with the way that the person being served sees the world, sees himself or herself in the relationship. So really a lot of the things that you guys were talking about really resonated with me. The pragmatism of harm reduction and also that relational piece of harm reduction too. And like you, Kathy, I really focused also on the community organizing piece that went. Yeah, it's very cool. So I wanted just to take a minute just to say how it is that at Heartland Health Outreach, HHO, that we kind of sort of backed into harm reduction. So we've been around for about 27 years, and by the early 90s, we were out there on the streets providing health care. Today, for instance, we provide health care in 100 different settings throughout the city of Chicago and the suburbs, shelters, drop-in centers, soup kitchens, that kind of thing. And as we engaged people, certainly, as you can imagine, a huge percentage of individuals experiencing homelessness have serious mental illness, and a huge percentage use drugs or alcohol and have problems related to their drug or alcohol use. And so as we started to engage people and meet them where they're at and build a relationship with people, and we tried to help them access services out there in the general social service community in Chicago, we started running into barriers. We started running into barriers like, well, this person is too mentally ill. This person is an active drug user. Active drug users can't live here. Only abstinent people can live here. This person's a drug user. He can't get into this employment program. We don't employ drug users. Things like, so we kept running into these barriers. And so I know one of the things that you had wanted me to talk about, Kathy, is a little bit about how then we started doing some systems level work, because in order to serve the people we were engaging, we certainly created some of our own housing programs and certainly our mental health programs and things like this, but that's just a Band-Aid. That's not a real solution. The real solution is to change the system so that homeless people can walk in any door and be treated with dignity and respect and understood, right? So we started, one of the projects we started was the Midwest Harm Reduction Institute. And the goal of MHRI, unlike maybe some other harm reduction groups out there who are doing wonderful work, especially kind of at the policy level and really the organizing level. Our goal was to really partner with other service providers and help them come to better understand what harm reduction is, help them master this kind of the approaches and the skills related to harm reduction, and incorporate harm reduction into their services so that their front door could be more accessible to the kind of people that we're serving. And so I thought I would give a couple examples of that. One of the things that, I think this ties into the community organizing piece. Around community organizing, the thing is that you build a relationship with people by meeting them where they're at, kind of accepting them. And then the other thing is that you try to find out what it is that they want or need and help organize around that. So one of the great things that happened to us here in Chicago around 2002, we developed a 10-year plan to end homelessness. And yes, we are in the 10th year, and there are still homeless people. But let's set that one aside. But we came about with a 10-year plan to end homelessness. And this plan to end homelessness was rooted in a concept called housing first. And housing first now is a pretty common approach throughout the United States. Not every city embraces it, but many, many do. But 10 years ago, it was kind of a radical idea, this idea of housing first. And Chicago was by far the largest city to sign on. Any other cities before that had been very, very, very small cities. And so, sure enough, Chicago signed on to this idea of housing first, meaning that the only requirement for housing is homelessness, right? But yet we still had a system, a fragmented system made up of a multitude of private organizations, all of them with their own missions and their own understanding of homelessness and housing and addiction and that kind of thing. So we have this fragmented system, and the vast majority of housing at the time really required things like radical and complete abstinence in order to get into housing. So that really made a housing first plan not work very well, right? I mean, it was not a very good match. So as there was more and more collective pressure for organizations to be more open about who they bring into services and who they house, and remain effective in keeping them housed because they're measured on that. Organizations started to realize, God, we gotta develop some skills around this. We've got to really get better at bringing folks in who may still be using drugs, who may have a mental illness and be symptomatic, that kind of thing. And through the Midwest Harm Reduction Institute, we formed a place for them to basically reach out and engage others who are a little bit further along, other organizations who had already embraced housing first and harm reduction, to go and really support them. How do we do that? We do that usually, we start by meeting with the staff, and we try to meet with all levels, including the board of directors if possible, or members of the board of directors if possible. We do really an initial evaluation of where are you at? We use a questionnaire. There's a wide array of different questions. Some are really simple harm reduction things like, it makes sense for smokers to step outside to smoke, right? And then others are a little bit more radical, like syringes should be exchanged in prisons, that kind of thing, right? And from that, we open up a dialogue with people to help them understand where they fit individually on this scale of harm, in terms of their willingness to accept harm reduction. And then we ask them collectively to start to set some goals in terms of what next steps are they comfortable with making, right? And then finally, we do a series of trainings, we do technical assistance, we ask people to talk about cases, and we look at cases from a harm reduction perspective. We look at their policies and procedures and analyze them from the perspective of, to what extent does this get in the way of developing that open relationship? To what extent does this make it difficult for someone to be open and honest about what they're going through and what's going on in their life? And if you think about it, what we're doing is we're taking a harm reduction approach to promoting harm reduction. And it's pragmatic. It has these kind of community organizing pieces to it because we're building relationship. And we're trying to look at things from the perspective of this provider, just like we ask providers to look at things from the perspective of the consumer, right? So I guess the one thing I'd like to just slip in there is that, I do sometimes think we do ourselves a disservice when we refer to harm reduction as progressive or radical or new. Harm reduction is how we deal with almost everything.
So why don't not everybody everybody in the room might be familiar with harm reduction, might think, oh, harm reduction is, you know, dealing with injection drug users, and it's needle exchange. Explain to us what you mean, like it's what we do every day.
Right. Harm reduction is any step we take to make safer a dangerous behavior. So driving, for instance, the most dangerous behavior that most of us engage in, and many of us do so on a day-to-day basis, driving. Wearing a seatbelt is harm reduction. This is a generational thing, but for younger people in the room, there's probably shock. But I grew up not knowing where the seatbelt was in the car, let alone how to put it on. And so that was through public health initiatives in the 1980s, the mid to late 1980s. We first learned that there were seatbelts, and that and then we were also educated that they could save our lives, and then we started to encourage us to put them on, and then they started to actually give us tickets if we didn't, back in the 90s. But so that's an example. I also started my career in the late 80s in a methadone clinic, and like many, many American workplaces at the time, everyone smoked everywhere, all the time. The nurses smoked while they were doing the dose. They go like this. I'm not exaggerating, okay? I'm not exaggerating. I was a non-smoker, but I was the only non-smoker. And that is, stepping outside to smoke is harm reduction. It's short of abstinence. No one's saying stop smoking. They're just saying step outside to smoke, right? So these are things that we do all the time. These are approaches to drug use that human beings have had for thousands of years. And it's really our insistence on complete and total abstinence is a very new and radical idea, very radical idea that's really only in the last 40 years. It's a very radical idea and very extreme. So I do think that one thing that I would also put out there is that we try to build bridges and help people see that some of the things that we're talking about are just really commonplace steps to help people make better decisions to the best of their capacity in the moment.
Well, thank you so much. I think, I know you were telling me before we started the panel that you've been asked to do, I know time is not our friend right now, but that you've been doing trainings with the Department of Family Services, did you say? Or,
yeah.
I mean, because there's, when we're talking about how do we reduce harm, sometimes moving a child away, I'm guessing and assuming, from the family, can you move and talk about, talking about educating workers about people who are in the Department of Child and Family Services about what harm reduction looks like, or
yeah, absolutely. So one of the projects
that methadone is not. I mean, I know I've dealt with this in parts of Illinois where people have lost custody of their children because they're on methadone. We can't imagine
because
that
they're taking their medicine.
Yeah, because that works for them, right?
So we've definitely seen inroads lately, and they say necessity is the mother of invention, and so I think partly the backdrop of this terrible economic, fiscal crisis that we're in, especially at the state level and the local levels, to some extent it's been helpful in forcing people to think a little bit more creatively, and the courts are definitely starting to think a little bit more creatively, especially in family court. Because the expense of breaking up families and just the sheer cost of
the
foster placements and all this is really encouraging judges, and it's the judges who are leading this. The judges are saying, "Wait a second, we gotta think this through a little bit better." So it's really interesting.
Right. I mean, it's moving sort of from, the way I think about it is instead of it being like an on-off switch, clean or dirty, or, good or bad parent, it's on a continuum. And how can we move people to, slightly better behavior? They're not necessarily, like, maybe their parenting has not been even. Where can we build this up? Where can we, so that we can, improve people's lives.
Where are the boundaries, what's good enough, what's never okay, and how do you help people stay in that area, and partnering with people, right? How do I help you live up to that? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I think this has been a great panel, and I'm sure, let's give everybody a give.